Far beyond the reach of any known civilization, in the dark, empty spaces of the galaxy, a signal was sent. It was faint, almost lost in the vastness of the cosmos. But despite its weak transmission, it carried a message that would shake the galaxy to its core. This was no ordinary signal. It was an ancient SOS, a call for help that reached the farthest corners of the universe. The message was brief, almost too short to understand, but it was clear in its urgency. It spoke of a terrible ancient evil that was awakening, a force so powerful and terrifying that no one had seen its like in the entire history of the galaxy. The alien race who sent this message, a small and forgotten species, was on the brink of extinction. Yet they were not asking for simple aid. They were begging for survival. Their words echoed through the communication channels, carrying a chilling declaration. The end is near. The darkness stirs, and only the Deathworlders can stop it. Come. Come now, or it will be too late. As the signal spread across the galaxy, it reached the ears of every major civilization, every council member, every diplomat, and military leader, but no one knew what to make of it. The alien race that had sent the message was considered insignificant by most, barely a footnote in the galaxy's history. Their planet was thought to be long abandoned, their technology outdated, their population dwindling. Yet now they were the ones warning the galaxy of a danger far beyond anyone's imagination. The council chambers buzzed with confusion. The leaders, who had long since dismissed the minor alien race, were now forced to take their message seriously. What was this darkness that the signal spoke of? And what did the ancient evil mean? Who or what could be so powerful that it required the attention of the galaxy's most feared warriors? The Deathworlders. The Deathworlders were legends. They were a terrifying, unstoppable force, a group of merciless warriors who had once roamed the galaxy, feared and respected by every known species. Their kind had once been the galaxy's weapon, an unholy alliance of the strongest, most dangerous beings from countless planets. The galaxy's most powerful races had learned long ago that the Deathworlders were not to be trifled with. They had vanished centuries ago, retreating into the farthest reaches of space. But now their name was being spoken again, their reputation alone sending chills down the spines of those who remembered their wrath. The signal, a fading, desperate cry from the forgotten species, carried with it a message that could not be ignored. The Deathworlders must return. Across the galaxy, the reactions were mixed. Some leaders dismissed it as a cry from a dying species, one that had lost all hope. But others, the more cautious ones, knew the true significance of the message. They knew that the Deathworlders did not act on trivial matters. Something real, something dangerous, was coming, and if the Deathworlders were being called back, it meant the galaxy was on the edge of disaster. The council convened in an emergency session. Representatives from the greatest civilizations gathered, their faces tense, their minds racing with questions. Why now? Why, after centuries of silence, had Earth's message arrived, calling for the deadliest warriors the galaxy had ever known? What had happened to bring the Deathworlders back into the fold? And more importantly, who or what was this ancient evil that had awoken? The tension in the council chambers was palpable. No one had seen the Deathworlders in over 1,000 years, not since the great wars that had changed the galaxy forever. And yet, the time had come. Their return was imminent. The signal was clear, and the galaxy had to prepare for what was coming. As the message played on, its final words echoed through the room. Coordinates are sent. Find us. The darkness is near. A set of coordinates, pinpointing an unknown system in the farthest reaches of space. No one had ever heard of this system before. It was uncharted, a place that had been ignored for centuries. But now, the galaxy's attention was focused on it. The coordinates would lead them to something unknown, something dangerous, and no one could ignore the warning. The council deliberated. How could they respond to a message that came from so far away? Who could they trust in this moment of uncertainty? Should they prepare for war, Or should they remain cautious, waiting to see what this threat really was? The minutes stretched into hours. Time was running out. The galaxy's most powerful races could no longer deny the truth. The Deathworlders were coming, and so was the threat they had been warned of. There was no turning back now. As the final moments of the council meeting approached, one thing became clear. The galaxy was on the brink of something terrible, and only the Deathworlders could stop it. With the coordinates in hand, the galaxy's greatest minds began to prepare. The Deathworlders would return to face the evil that had awoken, but at what cost? What horrors would they find when they arrived at the mysterious system? The fate of the galaxy now rested on a simple question. Would the galaxy be ready for what was coming next? The countdown had begun, and all eyes were on the stars. The galaxy was on the edge of a precipice, teetering between confusion and fear, uncertainty and anticipation. The coordinates from a mysterious SOS signal had been confirmed, an unknown system on the fringe of known space. With the Deathworlders' return imminent, there was no more time for doubt. The galaxy's leaders, once divided by distrust and politics, now faced the harsh reality of a threat no one truly understood. Word spread quickly across the systems. The Deathworlders, long thought to be a thing of the past, were being called back into action. But why? The mysteries of their disappearance were well known. Legends and myths told of their departure after the Great Wars, leaving only their names etched into the galaxy's darkest corners. No one knew where they had gone or how they had vanished, but their return meant something unimaginable. The coordinates that had been sent out were to a star system in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, a place that hadn't been mapped by any known race. It was a region so remote that even the most seasoned navigators avoided it. Now, it was the focal point of the galaxy's attention. The Council, in a rare act of unity, agreed that a fleet would be sent to investigate. Led by the most powerful and strategic minds the galaxy had to offer, the fleet would travel to the coordinates, hoping to uncover the truth behind the mysterious message. But this would not be an ordinary mission. The Deathworlders had been summoned, and their arrival would signal a shift in the balance of power that no one could predict. Across the galaxy, various species and factions began to prepare for what they feared might come. Ships were fortified, soldiers trained, and leaders gathered to discuss how to best respond to the looming crisis. There was a palpable sense of dread, as if something terrible was about to unfold, something no one was ready for. The Deathworlders, legendary in their brutal efficiency, had returned, but no one knew what side they would fight for, or if they could even be controlled. The first signs of the Deathworlders' arrival were subtle but unmistakable. A lone ship, larger than anything ever seen before, appeared at the edges of the uncharted system. It was cloaked in a shroud of darkness, its silhouette jagged and imposing against the backdrop of the stars. This was the first of many ships, each one carrying the warriors who had been summoned to face the ancient evil. Their arrival was swift and silent, like a predator stalking its prey. No one had expected them to be so close, so soon. The fleet that had been dispatched to investigate the coordinates watched from a distance, unsure of what to do. Should they make contact with the Deathworlders, or should they remain hidden, waiting for orders? The Council, in their haste to act, had left little guidance for those who would follow. All they knew was that the Deathworlders' arrival was both a blessing and a curse. They were the galaxy's last hope, but they were also a force beyond control. In the days that followed, whispers of the Deathworlders' reputation began to circulate once more. Old stories resurfaced, tales of merciless warriors who had fought in the greatest conflicts the galaxy had ever known. Some spoke of their brutal combat techniques, of battles fought and won in the blink of an eye. Others told of their cold, emotionless demeanor, of the way they destroyed anything in their path without hesitation. For some, the return of the Deathworlders was a sign of hope, but for others, it was a harbinger of doom. The galaxy's leaders convened once again, trying to make sense of the situation. They were forced to acknowledge the possibility that they had underestimated the scale of the threat they faced. Whatever the ancient evil was, It had been powerful enough to summon the galaxy's deadliest warriors from their self-imposed exile. The Deathworlders had never been summoned unless there was something truly catastrophic on the horizon. The military leaders, many of whom had never faced the Deathworlders directly, debated the best course of action. Should they attempt to ally with them, or should they keep their distance, fearful of what the warriors might do once they were unleashed? There was no clear answer. The Deathworlders had no interest in alliances. They operated alone, guided by their own code and their own understanding of survival. They were not negotiators. They were executioners. As the first Deathworlder ships continued to materialize in the system, the galaxy held its breath. No one knew what awaited them on the other side of the system's stars, where the coordinates had led. Some believed it was a trap set by the ancient evil, designed to lure the Deathworlders into their doom. Others thought it might be a forgotten weapon or relic, something from the galaxy's past that had been left undisturbed for centuries. Whatever it was, the galaxy was about to find out. In the shadows, as the fleet prepared for the unknown, a lone figure aboard one of the Deathworlder ships stood before a holographic display. His face was hidden behind a mask of metal and bone, but his eyes burned with a fierce intensity. This was one of the last of his kind, a warrior forged in the harshest environments, a being who had seen more death and destruction than most could ever imagine. He had been summoned, as had all his kin, to face the darkness that threatened to consume the galaxy. His people had always been the galaxy's last line of defense, but this time, something was different. The evil they were about to confront was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It was ancient enough to be forgotten by most, but powerful enough to destroy everything in its path. The Deathworlders were coming, and the galaxy was about to witness what true power looked like. Would they save the galaxy, or would they be consumed by the very darkness they had been summoned to fight? Only time would tell. The countdown had begun, and the stakes had never been higher. As the galaxy's mightiest forces gathered at the outer edges of the uncharted system, a sense of unease began to take hold. The Deathworlders, whose legend had been whispered in hushed tones for centuries, had arrived. But with them came the promise of something darker, a threat unlike anything anyone had anticipated. The true nature of the ancient evil that had called them back into the galaxy was now beginning to reveal itself. The fleet assembled by the galaxy's leaders was vast, but it was unclear whether they were preparing for a rescue mission, a war, or something far worse. The unknown loomed larger with each passing hour, as the Deathworlders, with their imposing ships and cold, calculated manner, made no effort to communicate. They simply waited, watching the galaxy's forces from the shadows, as they had always done. The fleet's commanders were on edge, unsure whether the Deathworlders would join them in their mission to investigate the coordinates or if they would act independently. The Deathworlders had always been unpredictable. Their reputation for ruthlessness and cold efficiency meant that no one truly knew what they would do when faced with an ancient threat. Could they be trusted, or would they become yet another unpredictable force in the growing chaos? Meanwhile, on the fringes of the system, something had begun to stir. At first, it was imperceptible, a subtle shift in the gravitational pull, a faint disturbance in the stars. But soon, it became clear. The ancient evil was not just a myth. It was real, and it was awakening. Hidden deep within the system's core, buried for millennia, was a dark power that had long been forgotten. Once, it had been a force of destruction, a weapon capable of obliterating entire civilizations. But when the galaxy's races united in the Great Pact centuries ago, they had sealed away this dark force, ensuring it would never be used again. Or so they thought. Now, with the return of the Deathworlders, something had triggered the awakening of this ancient power. The galaxy's leaders had made a critical error. They believed the ancient evil could be contained, that it was locked away in the deepest reaches of space, beyond the reach of any living being. But in their arrogance, they had failed to understand the true nature of the darkness they had sealed away. It was never meant to stay forgotten. The Deathworlders, however, had not forgotten. They had been summoned for a reason, and they knew that the time had come to face the darkness once again. They had fought battles of unimaginable horror before, wars that had torn entire star systems apart. But this was different. This evil was ancient, and it was more powerful than anything the Deathworlders had encountered in their long existence. At the heart of the galaxy, the Council convened once more. The leaders of every species, from the towering Artheans to the lithe and mysterious Zelvar, gathered in an emergency meeting. The SOS message had been received, and the Deathworlders had arrived. But the full extent of the threat was still unclear. What was this ancient evil? Was it the same force that had been sealed away long ago? And how could the galaxy stand against it if it had returned? Diplomats and strategists from every corner of the galaxy presented their theories. Some believed that the Dark Power was a long-forgotten alien species, one whose civilization had collapsed eons ago, but whose weapons still lingered in the void. Others feared it was an ancient artificial intelligence, a remnant of an old war that had gone rogue, seeking to destroy everything in its path. But none of these theories provided any real answers. In the depths of space, the Deathworlders continued their silent vigil. The warriors who had returned were not concerned with theories or politics. They were focused on one thing: survival. The galaxy's fate was no longer in the hands of politicians or diplomats. It was in the hands of the Deathworlders, the last line of defense. But even they could not predict what would happen next. As the fleet approached the coordinates, the first signs of the ancient evil began to reveal themselves. A massive, dark shape loomed ahead, an object of such size and malevolence that it seemed to warp the very fabric of space around it. The closer they got, the more powerful the dark presence became. It was as if the evil itself was reaching out, wrapping its tendrils around everything, pulling it into its grasp. The fleet slowed its advance, tension mounting as they neared the source of the disturbance. It wasn't just a ship or a weapon. They were approaching something far older, far more dangerous. The Deathworlders, the galaxy's most feared warriors, stood ready. Their ships moved with the grace of predators stalking their prey, but even they could feel the weight of the dark power that awaited them. On the bridge of one of the Deathworlder ships, the leader stood in silence. His eyes, sharp and calculating, watched as the massive object slowly came into view. His people had fought countless wars, seen countless enemies fall, but this was different. This wasn't just an enemy. This was a force of nature, a force that could consume the galaxy itself if left unchecked. As the fleet drew closer, the object suddenly came to life. Its surface, once dark and motionless, now began to shift and pulse with an eerie, unnatural energy. It was no longer dormant. The ancient evil had awakened, and its first act was to send a pulse of energy that rippled through the fleet, causing every ship to shudder in response. In the distance, a faint hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. The warriors of the galaxy, including the Deathworlders, braced themselves for what was coming. They had been summoned for this moment, to face the ancient evil that had waited for so long to return. But as the hum grew louder, the truth became clear. The battle for the galaxy was about to begin. And no one knew what the outcome would be. The ancient evil had awoken, and with it came the first true test for the galaxy's mightiest forces. The Deathworlders, the most feared warriors across the stars, stood ready as the massive, pulsating dark structure in front of them began to reveal its full scope. Every ship, every weapon, every strategy now seemed insignificant compared to the terror that loomed ahead. The galaxy had been thrust into a war it never saw coming. And now, they would have to fight not just for survival, but for the very future of the universe. The pulse of dark energy continued to ripple outward, distorting the fabric of space itself. Ships creaked and groaned, their hulls strained against the unnatural forces. The Deathworlders, however, stood unfazed. Their ships, designed for extreme combat and endurance, weathered the storm, their advanced technology proving to be a sturdy barrier against the dark energy that sought to tear them apart. But even they could feel the weight of what was to come. The leaders of the galaxy's united forces gathered, preparing for the first strike. Diplomatic talks had failed. There was no more time for peaceful resolutions. The galaxy had been lulled into a false sense of security for too long. This was no longer about alliances or politics. It was about survival. And the first strike would determine the course of everything that followed. From the Deathworlders' fleet, the first wave of weapons were unleashed. Their massive, heavily armored ships fired their most potent lasers, aiming directly at the dark structure that loomed ominously in front of them. The beams struck with incredible force, yet the structure absorbed the attacks without a single tremor. It was as if the dark power within was a living thing, a force that could bend the laws of physics to its will. The council leaders watched in horror as their best weapons failed to leave a mark. If the Deathworlders, the fiercest fighters in the galaxy, could not even scratch the surface of this evil, then what hope did the rest of the galaxy have? A wave of panic began to spread through the ranks, but it was swiftly silenced by the cold, calculating resolve of the Deathworlders. They had seen worse. They had survived worse. But this was different. The message from the ancient race that had triggered the SOS now made sense. This was not just a weapon. It was a force that could end everything. The dark structure wasn't a ship, a weapon, or even a creature. It was an entire ancient civilization that had been sealed away for millennia. They were not dealing with a singular enemy. They were facing an entire forgotten civilization's destructive legacy, ready to bring ruin to the galaxy once again. The first assault failed, but it gave the Deathworlders something crucial: intel. The energy pulses from the structure had a rhythm, a pattern. The Deathworlders, with their uncanny ability to analyze combat situations, quickly recognized this pattern and began to coordinate their next strike. They knew they couldn't defeat the dark structure with brute force alone. They would need to outthink it, adapt, and attack at its weaknesses. Meanwhile, on the Council's flagship, tension was at an all-time high. The political leaders had no experience fighting something of this magnitude. The military leaders, however, knew the stakes. They understood that the fate of the galaxy now hung in the balance. Every move had to be calculated. Every decision had to count. The galaxy's warriors would follow the lead of the Deathworlders, but they would need more than just courage. They would need strategy, unity, and determination. In their desperation, the leaders of the galaxy agreed on a risky, untested plan: a combined strike, uniting all the forces of the galaxy for one final assault. The Deathworlders took the lead, their ships moving like shadows through the chaos. The galaxy's forces, from the sleek, agile ships of the Zelvar to the brute force armadas of the Artheans, formed up around them. Each race brought something unique to the table: speed, strength, or sheer firepower. Together, they prepared for their most ambitious strike yet. The plan was simple: find the core of the ancient evil and hit it with everything they had. The Deathworlders, with their superior combat instincts, would lead the charge, using their ships to draw the dark power's attention while the rest of the fleet moved in from the periphery. Once they identified the core, the entire galaxy's forces would hit it with everything they had, combining their weapons and technology into one massive, concentrated blow. As the combined fleet moved closer to the dark structure, an eerie calm settled over the battlefield. The ancient evil pulsed with malevolent energy, almost as if it were aware of their approach. And then, as the Deathworlders closed in, it happened. The structure seemed to implode in on itself, collapsing into a singularity of energy. A massive shockwave erupted, sending ripples of destruction through the fleet. Ships rocked violently, and some were torn apart in an instant. The Deathworlders remained unshaken, their ships expertly maneuvering through the storm of energy. The galaxy's forces, however, were struggling to maintain their position. The shockwave seemed to distort space itself, making navigation almost impossible. But the Deathworlders were relentless. They pushed forward, dodging the blasts and returning fire with surgical precision. They understood the true nature of the battle. This wasn't just about defeating an enemy. This was a fight for the very survival of the galaxy. The fate of every race, every world, hung in the balance. Finally, the galaxy's forces found their target. Deep within the heart of the structure, they discovered the source of the dark power, a massive, pulsating core that seemed to draw energy from the very fabric of space. With a coordinated effort, the Deathworlders and the galaxy's remaining forces launched their final strike. A concentrated blast of energy surged toward the core, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The explosion was deafening. A blinding light consumed everything. The shockwave reverberated across the galaxy, reaching even the farthest corners of space. And then, silence. When the light cleared, the dark structure was gone. The evil that had threatened the galaxy had been eradicated, but the cost had been immense. The galaxy's warriors had won, but they had lost so much in the process. The Deathworlders stood victorious, but they knew this battle had only been the beginning. The galaxy was forever changed. The galaxy lay in a fragile silence. The dark structure had crumbled, its malevolent force vanquished by the combined might of the galaxy's fiercest warriors. The Deathworlders, bloody but unbroken, floated amidst the wreckage of their final assault. They had fought and bled for this moment, their survival instinct and strategic brilliance having saved the galaxy from annihilation. But there was no celebration, no cheering. Only a heavy, somber quiet hung in the void of space. The leaders of the galaxy's united forces, those who had once been reluctant to believe in the threat, now watched in awe as the Deathworlders began to regroup. They were warriors, not just in name, but in essence, proud, resolute, and relentless. Yet even they could not ignore the toll the battle had taken. Ships were scattered, wrecked, or simply gone. Entire fleets had been reduced to dust. On the Council's flagship, representatives from each race surveyed the damage. Their faces were a mixture of relief and sorrow. The war was over, but the scars would remain. Worlds had been lost, lives had been sacrificed, and the cost of victory weighed heavily on everyone's hearts. The Deathworlders' leader, a towering figure clad in the battle-worn armor of his people, stood at the forefront of his fleet. His piercing gaze was fixed on the coordinates displayed before him, the uncharted system that had once held the galaxy's greatest threat. His ship was battered, its once pristine hull now scarred with the marks of war. But the look in his eyes was one of resolve. This was the way of his people. They fought, they conquered, and they moved forward. But as his ship turned away from the remains of the ancient evil, something unexpected occurred. A faint signal, faint but unmistakable, pulsed through the galaxy. It was weak, almost lost to the depths of space, but it was there, growing stronger. A new message. From somewhere deep within the cosmos, a voice reached out once more. The galaxy's leaders, who had thought themselves safe, felt a chill run down their spines. Had they truly defeated the darkness, or had they merely opened the door to something even worse? The Deathworlders' leader turned toward the horizon, his instincts tingling with the familiar sense of danger. "Prepare yourselves," he said, his voice gruff but steady. "The war is not over." Across the galaxy, a new fear began to stir. The ancient evil had been vanquished, but the universe was far from peaceful. A new chapter was beginning, one that no one could predict. As the galaxy's forces began to organize, rumors spread like wildfire. The message was clear. Something worse was coming. And the Deathworlders, with their indomitable will and fearsome reputation, would once again be called to the front lines. In the distance, the stars burned brightly, their light piercing the endless black of space. The galaxy had survived this battle, but no one could deny the truth now. The cosmos was far darker and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And in the heart of that darkness, the Deathworlders would always stand ready. The screen went dark. the echo of the Deathworlder's final words hanging in the air like a warning. The message was clear. The greatest threats had yet to be revealed. The galaxy was at peace, but for how long?